Hi everyone, let's just wait for a minute. We started a bit early. Let people join. I see there are people joining in, so just give me a minute to start, please. All right, let's get started. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on the time zone you're watching us. A warm welcome to everyone who has joined our today's webinar. I'm your host Naveen Rathi, and the focus on today's webinar is SAP Integration Suite Security Best Practices. I'm joined by two experienced gentlemen in this area, Mr. Sridhar, Global Lead SAP Platform Technology and SAP Infra Services, with 22 plus years of experience, and also Mr. Prasad, Director, 16 years of experience in SAP Technology and Innovation. Now, those who joined new and have missed our previous 3 episodes, our expert has covered topics like BTP overview and value it brings to the business. Also, the second episode talks about SAP BTP migration from Neo to CF. And lastly, migration of on-prem integration scenarios to cloud consideration and limitation. So please do check them out. We have provided the link in the chat. And of course, you have a chance to address your questions directly to Mr. Sridhar and Mr. Prasad after the presentation. We have a dedicated Q&A address to your questions. Now, without wasting much time, let's start with the presentation. Over to you, Mr. Sridhar.
Hey, thanks, Naveen. Once again, from my side, good morning, good evening, hopefully good night, wherever you are. Thank you all for joining this. And as Naveen was explaining, I mean, we started this as a 5-series webinar. We covered the overall BTP overview, the architecture, the runtimes, and so on. I mean, initially we introduced the BTP as a platform to everyone. And then we also followed the same webinar with the next in the series. I mean, with the applications migration from the old SAP Neo platform to Cloud Foundry runtime. I mean, we covered that as well. We also spoke through migration of on-prem integration scenarios to cloud, what all various considerations, limitations, our experiences, and so on. Those were actually covered. And we are now touching upon on the topic, I mean, SAP Integration Suite security, because this being one of the, especially this being a SaaS solution from SAP, and a lot of customers, a lot of business partners have various different, I would not call doubts, but I mean, definitely there are some ifs and buts. I mean, is it really secure? Whether we actually should be going ahead with SAP Integration Suite instead of using an on-prem solution like a PIPO? How does that gel well within our security practices and so on? So we thought that, I mean, maybe touching upon the security best practices that ideally should be followed, and also the features that are available in the SAP Integration Suite from a security standpoint, all that are going to be covered today. And this is the high-level agenda for today's webinar. I mean, a lot of content to cover, but we'll try to do the justice. We will start with, I mean, the initial introduction to SAP Integration Suite security and what kind of expectations would be there from an SAP Integration Suite or any other SaaS solutions. We'll see, I mean, and what kind of information security services and security levels are offered within SAP Integration Suite. And we'll then jump on to right from setting up, once the SAP integration is set up, I mean, how do we access it? The IAS, the Identity Authentication Service, I mean, how that tenant plays a role in terms of accessing the integration suite. And if there is a possibility of integrating IAS or the Identity Authentication Service with our, every organization has its own Active Directory or any other, authentication mechanism, right? What kind of integration options are available? How do we integrate that with IAS and so on? We'll quickly touch upon, followed by the most important thing. I mean, how is our data protected? Because I mean, this being a SaaS solution, not only the data is going to be stored in a different environment altogether, but also there is going to be information flow between our systems to our business partner systems through the SAP Integration Suite. And in that context, how the data flow related security aspects are taken care of, what are our inbound and outbound security considerations or features that are available that we could use while configuring this. This is the agenda that we wanted to cover today, right? Yeah, over to you, Prasad.
Yeah, thanks, Sridhar. Thanks, Sridhar. Hi, all. So, very good morning, good evening. So, today, since like we have launched the BTP webinar series, we covered majority of the topics in terms of BTP architecture aspect, and also since SAP stopped Neo offerings, so migration of applications and also integration scenarios from Neo to multi-cloud environments. So there are multiple, things we need to consider when it comes to security aspect as well, because the data or the process as part of integration development compared to Neo and CF. So there are multiple security aspects being implemented by SAP. Either it is the trust establishments or even the communication aspects with the other tools. Even they have enhanced a lot of open connector specific adapters. So that's where the security literally comes into picture. What are all the standards SAP is providing? Even our experience aspect, what we faced and how we solved, we will discuss in terms of the complete security aspect. So here the SAP Integration Suite security and as well as check. So generally, what are all these are the high level things as part of security checks when it comes to applying the security measures for integration suite. So generally the major security related aspects of SAP Integration Suite are measures to protect customer data that is passed through SAP Integration Suite during the execution of the integration scenarios, and also customers who use SAP Cloud Platform integration. So they notice that the significant part of their business partners data or any data, so which is sensitive, so and is processed and stored within the infrastructure not owned by themselves, right? So which is completely managed by SAP. So in our experience, like we have supported or we have worked on implemented scenarios for banking customers where they are much worried in terms of the data sensitivity, where the data cannot be controlled by themselves, where SAP managing the data security. It's like we will discuss more on that, what are the customer concerns and how SAP addressed with the help of the technical admins or developers. So yeah, so here the security checks when it comes to integration suite. So SAP always provides the standard security standards in terms of managing the technical system landscape, fail safe, the technical system landscape, and the secure communication when it comes to talking to the on-premise or SaaS solutions, and also storage locations of the messages which are need to be secured. So SAP follows these kind of security standards compared to other SaaS middleware solutions or iPaaS solutions. SAP manages all these things, and also development and process standards. So for example, integration suite, cloud exemplar packages or building blocks SAP provides, where the all API standards SAP maintains in terms of communicating the different systems, and also security standards while upgrading or migrating for integration scenarios, right? So as I said, from Neo to CF or multi-cloud, so there are much more security standards need to be considered in terms of data and flow as well. So that comes when it comes to handshaking between the system or token-based communications. So all these things we need to consider as part of development standards. And onboarding is exactly the step where we will be provisioning the integration suite tenant, and these are respective operations need to be adhered to the SAP standards, while customer the tenants are going to be maintained through virtual environments. So the setting up the secure connections between the on-prem and cloud and other SaaS solutions are going to be one of the key activity in terms of onboarding. And message exchange. So these are all the actually the checks. So message exchange is the one process how the messages are exchanged within an integration scenario so that the involved data is protected. So for that, SAP offers the levels of securities like transport level security and as well as the message level security. So for example, here like when designing integration flows, customers can choose between several options to protect the messages by establishing the secure communication channels, right? So transport level security and by configuring the digital encryption and digital signing of message security, which we can call it as a message level security. So these are all the checks which we need to consider in terms of integration scenario development and information security services and security levels. So yeah, so here we have two types of message level securities are there. But before that, these are the standards of information security services which need to be considered for any middleware frameworks. For example, confidentiality in the sense like the transport level security must be applied and message level security, and also integrity where the communication between the multiple systems are going to be organized through digital signatures or publicly key infrastructures or CA certificates. And then we have availability in the sense resource redundancy, multiplication, and resource restrictions and authorization, where like we'll applying the security aspect here. And then authenticity, the message level security, and as well as digital signature or PKI. These are all the certificate-based communications which we're going to apply at message level as well. So then non-repudiation, so that is digital and signatures and PKI. This is also applies same authenticity aspect. So these are all the standards of information security service where the SAP Integration Suite covers all these confidentiality, integrity, availability, authenticity, and non-repudiation. So these are all we are going to apply while designing or onboarding or securing, establishing the secure communications between the systems. Yeah. Right. So transport level security. So basically, as we have already discussed, many customers have questions regarding the encryption of the data in transit because data is very sensitive and confidential. So SAP, since SAP Integration Suite is a part of BTP, so BTP uses encrypted communication channel based on HTTPS and TLS. So TLS is a transport layer security, which is a protocol that provides privacy and a data integrity between the communication of the applications. So TLS is it ensures that the connection is a remote endpoint is the intended endpoint through encryption and endpoint identity verification. So the protocol is described by the IETF, that is Internet Engineering Task Force, in request for commit. So even the PO, if you take process orchestration, also follows the same transport level security. So the integration suite follows the transport level security is one of the security level among two, that is message level security and transport level security, which is inbuilt and adopted by the SAP Integration Suite as part of the secure communication. So yeah, when you go to the next slide. So message level security. So this we also call it as web services security. So this contains the web service security conversation, trust, policy, federation, privacy, and test. So these are all the message level security standards which generally applies when it comes to username token based communication or X.509 identity certification tokens or Kerberos tokens, SML assertion, custom domain. So these are all message level security supports. These are all the tokens or communication between the integration flows or between the systems which are going to be establish the message exchange. Okay, so Right. So the security levels aspect, we have seen like, the HFTP or HTTPS or SMTP. So these are all the transport level securities where, in terms of SFTP, like which is based on secure shell, that is SSH, which is used as a secure transfer files for the within the network as part of the communication. So it contains 128 bits to protect the FTP communication, which is the default, as a security standard provided by SAP. So SAP actually, it used asymmetric keys provided by, 2048 bit. So that's where SFTP is more secure when it comes to integration suite communication, which is very much secure. And HTTPS, which is, TLS based again, and this is hypertext transformation protocol, which is highly encrypted secure channel through which data can be transferred. So the length the length of the asymmetric here also 2048. So that's where SAP suggests to communicate always with HTTPS and SFTP. And SMTP is again mail transfer protocol, which always follows the start TLS extended operation, which is mostly followed by the standards of SMTP. So these are all the transport level security protocols which are going to be supported by the industry standards, even SAP Integration Suite support here. So the other part is message level security. The message level security is the PKCS. Actually, PKCS is a specific standard used for generation and verification of digital signatures, and the certificates managed by the PKI, that is public key infrastructure. So this standard served as the basis of secure and multi-purpose internet email. Also, it supports internet email extensions, but the PKCS 7 is the one of the standard and way. PKCS 12 is also there, but PKCS 7 is the one of the most trustable and cryptographic message syntax, which is widely used by the industry standards. And also open PGP, that is we call it as open pretty good privacy. So this is again open pretty good privacy is also one kind of end-to-end encrypted mail communication, but it also supports encrypted messaging and also uses for the password managers. So OpenPGP is one of the end-to-end encrypted email communication basically, but it supports the messages and also the password manager flexibility, protection. So it's XML signature. So this is again one of the digital signature. We can call it as XML DSIG as well. Is an electronic and encrypted stamp of authentication for on digital information, such as messages. So the digital signature confirms that the information originated from the signer and was not, altered in the transmission. That's where the XML digital signature is the powerful when it comes to payload transformations. So like this, and we have WS security, which is again the SOAP or HTTP based security, where the SOAP body and message header holds the user credentials, and the SOAP body holds the XML based messages. So this is also one of the standards which we have seen earlier of message level security. So this standard is applicable for the SOAP body. So these are all security levels which generally when it comes to administrators or when it comes to developers, they will be considering all these message level securities or transport level securities when it comes to message protection. So message can be protected multi messages or single messages also. Okay, so let's go to the next.
Yeah. Before we move on to the next section, I think, there is a new logical section coming up. Just wanted to remind the audience that please use the Q&A section to, type in any questions that you may have in all the topics that were covered so far, or otherwise, in general, with respect to SAP Integration Suite security. Please do use the Q&A box. Go ahead, Prasad.
Yeah. So identity authentication service. So you must be aware of SAP's cloud identity authentication service, which is mandatory now for every multi-cloud service access. Even if you take the latest releases of WorkZone or Build apps, what SAP is saying, SAP is making mandatory the authentication should happen through IAS only, right? So the IAS, how that the IAS can be leveraged in the case of integration scenarios. So IAS tenant can be used in two ways. One is it can be used as a main identity provider where we create the application and add all the users to IAS tenant. That is one case. And other case is IAS can also be used as a proxy, in which case all the authentication requests we will be keeping with the third-party identity providers, like for example, Azure ADFS and etc. So Azure Directory, which handles the user management and generally resides within the organization one network. So these are the two areas. And also one more thing, IPS, Identity Provider Service, which is again interlinked with the IAS, through which you will be providing the provisioning of the Azure or third-party services through IPS. So here in this case, we no need to concentrate on IPS. So here, in case of integration suite, IAS tenant is used as an endpoint, in the sense like organization managing IAS account can use it as either as a proxy or as a main authentication. Either of these two above options they can use. And also generally custom domain service is also there, where customers can bypass their actual URL and then they can mask the URL and then they can give a custom domain URL, and that can be mapped in the IAS so that no hackers cannot identify the the actual URL. That's the one part. And the other part is unauthenticated access can be avoided, where the users who are there in integration suite, so those users need to be authenticated by the IAS first. Then only they can have access to the integration suite, where they can see all the integration scenarios and all. So these are the IAS aspect. We can also see how the authentication flow goes within IAS. Can we go to the next one? Okay, so this is actually an example. Like if organization A wanted to have the IAS to be deployed in their environment, in their network, and they wanted to use ADFS as a third-party corporate identity provider in their network. So in that case, like how the metadata flows when it comes to the accessibility of integration suite by the customer. So when it comes to login requests, so the configuration completely based on SAML assertion. So we have to configure the integration suite BTP and also IAS and also the SAML assertion. So where we need to configure the complete flow between integration suite, IAS and BTP. So here the request between 1 and 6, so login request and authenticates user, we have a couple of steps. Like SAML request is going to be sent by the integration suite to IAS, and then IAS in turn get the SAML response from the corporate IDP, and then subsequently forwards that response to integration suite as a trust provider. So that trust is sure. So that's where integration suite allows the user to authenticate, and subsequently can go either it is developer or the production environment. It is always recommended to follow the IAS based communication. So nowadays, I mean, majority of the customers, they don't leverage IAS, but adopting IAS is one of the key secure aspect for their data sensitivity. Yeah. Right. So when it comes to, in an elaborated way, so identity authentication service for cloud integration, we have access management. That's what we have seen, like, right? So the users who access the platform are authenticated, against an identity provider, that is IAS. But in case of by default, SAP Identity Service, that is ID service, is the default one which enables the access of the integration suites tenant. So where customer must have an S user or a P user through which they can access. But in case of IAS, we can also leverage the same IDs, but the authentication happens through IAS. So where IAS will hold the P users, those are going to be mapped with your actual users. And the user management and authorization. So access to the dedicated functions of the platform is controlled and protected by the authorization checks. This is actually, either in terms of the applications which we deployed on BTP or any integration scenarios aspect. If any specific applications or integration scenarios or executions need to be accessed by the certain team, so that can be controlled. So at the user management and authorization level, and also we can manage all these things through authorization groups. So a group need to be maintained and the dedicated permissions need to be attached to handle the specific tasks and handling the life cycle of the complete integration project. So this has to be maintained in the identity authentication only. And authorization of the integration developer. This is also same case. Here also we have to maintain specific group of developers for agile developers groups and respect to permissions. And the groups need to be maintained and mapped within SAP BTP and Integration Suite as well. So that's where the communication and trust is going to be established to allow users to the respective tasks. And then authentication and authorization option for inbound calls, even for outbound calls. So whenever a sender system calls the integration platform using a HTTPS based request, for example, we have taken as an inbound. So the calling sender, in the sense, let us say I'm using integration suite and I'm trying to call Amazon, for example. So the sender who is going, he also need to authenticate itself against the integration platform, because they also going to send their APIs and then subsequent tokens of their APIs. Before that, they also need to be trusted by the integration suite. That can happen through some OAuth or some basic authentication aspect or SAML. So that's where the authentication and authorization option for inbound calls is also it's mandatory. So in integration suite, we are going to use Postman to check how the inbound calls are happening with the token based communication, whether it is rightly happening or any problem is there in terms of getting the tokens from the senders. Okay, so these are all the identity authentication service for integration cloud integration scenarios. Yeah, right. So this is one of the interesting topic in terms of data protection, privacy, and malware scan. So by default, nobody enables this particular tools. So for example, data protection and privacy for cloud integration. So different kinds of data, such as message content or monitoring data, can be stored during the operation of an integration scenario. So in these three areas, like message content, monitoring data, and other data such as like log files and all. So these are all actually different aspects when it comes to data protection, because message content, messages are going to be processed at the time of runtime, right? Typically runtime. So contains business data and also the integration scenarios. So therefore, it contains the sensitive customer data such as addresses, names, or financial information. So these are going to be message content is one of the data protection aspect. When the data is at rest, it can be stored in encrypted. So these are all the rules and one of the policies which we need to apply in terms of design standards. When the data is in the transit, several measures can be taken, such as I told you, right? Message signing and message content encryption using message level security. So that need to be applied here. And monitoring data. So the message monitoring are going to be happen when message processing log records the processing steps of an integration suite flow. So only users assigned to this particular tenant or admins can access the the message data, monitoring data, because monitoring gives the complete visibility of the scheduling aspect or how your interfaces are executing. All these critical information will be there in the monitoring data. And other data is subsequently whenever we see any issues or whenever we see any kind of logs. By default, we will not enable logs, but the logs are going to be by default piled up. So as then using the logs also, we can also capture the data which is sensitive. So that's where the logs information is strictly isolated. So additionally, SAP has no access to data. So that means whenever customer logs are going to be created, it doesn't mean that SAP can access the logs. It's strictly to the owner of the tenants. So that's where the security, SAP assures the leakage of the data of the customer, and also the data storage encryption uses AES. So that is advanced encryption standard. Generally AES, we have AES 128 and AES 256. Some standards are there, but SAP by default uses AES 128, which is faster and more efficient. Compared to AES 256 is more resistant compared to AES 28, just to hold the force attacks of the integrations. So that's where the data protection and privacy is one of the key elements, which where the admin team of Integration Suite holds the complete roles and permissions here. So yeah. So malware scanner. So malware scanner is actually it scans the design time artifacts and then identifies any specific malware is there or not. So the malware applies like document that we upload within the integration package, or the artifacts are API based communications, or even OData API. So the malware with the release of 12.x onwards for SAP Cloud Integration, SAP provided this tool where it scans the OData API artifacts, even key store files like x.509 certificates, even binary parameter resources. All these things are going to be scanned by the malware. So this is a feature of cloud integration which is by default not enabled. Generally, we need to enable the malware scanner. This generally done by the admin team. Okay, so yeah. So and also we can also since the integration suite developed on Apache platform and Apache libraries, Java libraries. So the Log4j is the we have seen right a couple of years, last year I believe. So it's a very widely used open source logging library. So just to control the vulnerabilities, just to avoid any attacks, okay, right? In terms of identifying the Java libraries and then subsequently injecting the distribute the libraries which will impact on the business data. So CPLint is an open source tool. It's a command line tool. So that will use to allow us to disallow certain Java libraries which may cause some damage to our integration scenarios. So and also CPLint is a command line tool actually. So it will let us to automate and governance of the integration flows. So with CPLint, even we can create executable development guidelines by setting up the rules so that the developers can follow those rules, and then subsequently they can use as per the instructions given by CPLint. So the license is free. So and we can use CPLint when it comes to avoid any Log4j specific vulnerabilities. Yeah. Right. So integration authentication option. So are there any points you would like to just to cover, or we would like to continue, or you want to first continue?
No, there is a question before moving on to the next section. Maybe you would want to address the question and then move on to the next logical section. That probably makes a little different from moving on the.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Is SOAP secure than REST, right? Question.
Yes.
Yeah, basically, we should not compare, but even REST is faster actually when compared to data transfer than SOAP. But when it comes to even REST is lighter. So, and also it makes things easier. But SOAP is more secure. We have to admit that. And even SOAP and REST can use SSL communication. Sorry, as part of protecting the data during the API calls. But in a easy way, I can say REST is faster compared to now. Right now, the integration suite aspect, even SAP suggesting to go with SOAP. For example, REST. For example, like we have success factors communications, right? So earlier we used to communicate with SOAP APIs through success factors for any kind of integration scenarios to be developed for success factors. Now success factor also, SAP also changed for faster communication, that is SF APIs, which are REST based, that is OData. So that's where the SSL based communication will happen, but SOAP is much more secure because it follows the WS standards, and also XML based body it will contains the SOAP envelopes and SOAP body aspect. But when it comes to REST is faster, lighter, and through applying OAuth communications, so we can use REST more secure. So a recommendation point of view, REST is recommended in terms of getting the faster response. Okay, yeah.
All right.
So yeah, so integration authentication options. So generally, we when it comes to exchanging messages between two systems like sender and receiver, we call, so right. So vice versa in any case. So we have to just the integration suite is the solution or the middleware or iPaaS solution. It will take the inbound and as well as the outbound calls, right? So in any case, the authentication has to be considered, either it is inbound or outbound. So what are all the suggested, the authentication options for inbound scenarios and as well as outbound, and what are all the things we need to consider? We will check on that. So one is basic authentication, which we know everybody knows that. So the basic authentication is user and password based communication. User and password based credentials, which we need to pass it on, and subsequently the communication establishes, right? So but this is not at all recommended way, that need to be replaced through OAuth actually. But let's go to the next slide where we can see how basic authentication flows. So the basic authentication generally it's an HTTPS based calls works for the basic authentication. So the basic authentication, the calling entity, sorry, is authenticated based on the credentials. That's what I said, like username and password exclusively we have to pass, and client certificate authentication and certificate to user mapping, and client certificate authentication and OAuth 2. So these are all the different aspects of the basic authentication, but where we will be passing using the OAuth based communication. So for example, here if you take here tenant and receiver, so here a request is passing from tenant to receiver. Sorry, it says recover, so receiver. So here key store at the tenant level, we will be having a key store where a receiver server root certificate we have to place, and then subsequently a user credentials artifacts has to be maintained, that is user ID and password, so within the tenant. So that's where while calling, the tenant is going to be authenticated as the user ID and password is already passed, and then subsequently the database or the subsequent integration scenarios can be accessible. But this is a basic scenario where we know everybody knows that whenever we call even from SAP Internet Communication Manager, while calling any HTTP based or business server pages applications, we always seen that a basic authentication based communications, right? Where from the browser aspect, the user ID password will be passed as a header level by the respective service, communication framework service, and then subsequently user no need to enter the ID and password. But these are all basic authentication is always useful when it comes to at the design level, where we no need to worry about the certificate purchase or the cost for at the time of design. At the time of production, so it is always recommended to go with the certificate based authentication, so which will avoid any kind of data or hacking privacies data, or the any kind of vulnerabilities. Yeah. Right. So this is actually client certificate and the certificate to user mapping. So this is actually sender. If you take the sender as the integration, sender as the SAP system or any other system, and also tenant as the integration scenario, the load balancer is optional actually. So few customers, or they may use the load balancer. Either it is some proxy server, or they may use web dispatcher. So in all the case, the certificate, the root certificate has to be maintained in all. Like we have to keep in the load balancer, and also we have to keep the certificate in the tenant area. So in every respective system, the key store will maintain the respective system root certificate, so that it can receive the request, and the request can be passed in the target system, and then subsequently we can access the integration flows. So these are all the certificate-based communications. While doing the certificate-based communications, we have to keep in mind the trusted certificate enablement in terms of keeping the communication between the systems. So the calling entity is authenticated based on the certificate, and the certificate is mapped to the user. So for which the authorization check is executed in a subsequent step. So that means, like, for example, here sender is trying to access the load balancer because they need to access tenant, but load balancer need to be satisfied with the credentials. That's where the root certificate is going to be maintained in the both. So, and the similarly, the chain need to be maintained here in the client, at the tenant level as well. So that's where the load balancer is going to be authenticated, and subsequently request will be passed to the tenant. So these are all mostly admin level activities, but when it comes to establishing the security, we have to keep in mind, even when it comes to cloud connector, which is a kind of a proxy to communicate with the on-premise systems. There also we have to keep, we have to maintain the trusted communication, right? So that's where there also the root certificate will be taken from the sender and will be maintained in the cloud connector. So if any certificate is going to be expire, the communication is going to be disturbed. So we need to keep an eye on the certificate, whether it is valid or not. When it comes to integration scenario, is getting failed with the authorizations and all. Yeah. OAuth 2. See, OAuth 2 actually, this is basically it allows the communication between the systems without providing a basic authentication aspect. It's purely through credentials on certificate based. So the authentication scenario is without the need of the sharing of the credentials. That means here the sender will be requesting the access through a token. So that token server is going to validate and give the access to the token, and similarly the token is going to used to talk to the endpoint system. So that's where in one of our customer who are who are producing adhesive solutions. So we implemented the communication between Amazon selling partner APIs and integration suite using completely OAuth based token based communication, because the complete Amazon selling partner API is based out of REST based and also completely token based. So every call a new token need to be generated, and we have built some custom logic to catch hold of the tokens using some Groovy scripts, and then we have used those tokens dynamically while calling the APIs. So this is one of the key areas for every integration developers or even customers. They need to keep how OAuth works, and how OAuth can be used in terms of getting access for token-based communication. But before that, generally we need to test the complete navigation using Postman app, and where we need to just sign up the Postman, and then subsequently we have to use the post method, and we have to use the CPI endpoint, and then subsequently we have to link the space, and subsequently OAuth to all these things we have to do using Postman. And once we succeeded, then we can map in the integration suite. So Postman is the very useful tool to test this token-based communication using OAuth. Okay, so yeah. And subsequently, as we have seen inbound and subsequently outbound also similar thing, and basic authentication and client certificate authentication, OAuth-based communications would be there. So if you go to the basic authentication, as we have seen in the inbound, similar kind of flow would be there, but in the case of outbound, so we will be calling the receiver, and the receiver credentials are going to be invoked. But this is not at all recommended, where we need to use OAuth as part of the communication. So can we go to the next slide? Yeah. So since we have seen the basic authentication aspect, now we are seeing the client certificate authentication outbound aspect. So the outbound aspect, again, how it works. So tenancy is going to be is going to communicate with the receiver system, where the complete tenant specific certificate, client certificate, is going to be maintained with the public key and private key. So the encryption is going to happen, or decryption is going to happen along with the private key or the public key, which will be transferred to the receiver and then subsequently validated, and then access is going to be provided. So the client certificate authentication for inbound and outbound happens the same. But for example, if I take SAP as the sender and integration suite as the hyper solution, and let us say some SaaS communication, for example, Amazon itself. So within the SAP and integration suite, the communication can be done using basic authentication. But in the productive scenario, we have to use the certificate-based communication, that is trusted certificates. Generally, self-signed would be there. If customer wanted to go with the third-party signed certificates, there also they can purchase and they can deploy, and then they can use the certificate communication between ECC and as well as integration suite. And then subsequently, same OAuth communication aspect, the token-based communication can be established between integration suite and the target system. So that's where the communication happens without using user ID password, and the completely secure way based of communication. Yeah. So this is again OAuth client credentials grant. This is again one of the cloud integration token-based service, which is having a kind of the client credentials approving mechanism using token service server is going to happen with couple of latest scenarios, like with the OAuth 2.0 client credentials grant. This actually we use whenever we go with the very high protected OAuth communication. Generally we go with OAuth 2, but the credentials grant is going to be applied in every case. We are going to have the dynamic OAuth token. The same scenario we applied in our one of the customer. That's what I told you, right? We get every communication from the receiver, which is highly protected by the OAuth, where everything is token based. So the grant access which we are going to get from the receiver is going to be happen when we submit the right token, but the token is going to be changed for every API call. So that's where we have to be very sure in terms of getting the right token and passing the right token from the token service and subsequently sending to the receiver. So that's where the client credentials grant is going to be one of the I can say high protective protected way of work. Okay. Yeah. Yes. So also we have other security related information when it comes to user interface and security measures. I'll talk about user interface security. As we are using, if you go with the SAP process orchestration or PIPO, generally we use SAP provided GUI, and through which we will be designing the integration scenarios. Later, SAP also enabled Eclipse based integration scenarios development for BPM. CC BPM is in GUI, and then BPM models using Eclipse based within process. But when it comes to CPI or integration suite, so the SAP provided the web UI, which is web based user interface, supported JavaScript and UI5. This is a very secured user interface built by SAP just to prevent the vulnerabilities such as cross-site scripting or cross-site request forgery, XSRF we call it as. So the built-in security capabilities are there from SAP of these technologies. So where we can use securely design and coding within using web UI. So by following the standards or principles by the SAP. So even we have a couple of third-party tools, but we always prefer to go with the web UI, which is internally connected with the discovery centers and importing the packages and then subsequently building the integration scenarios. So that's where the user interface is also one of the secured layer provided by the SAP for the integration scenarios development. And then we have security measures for remote API. What exactly is this? So in order to protect the CSRF or cross-site request forgery attacks, or while doing any modification of the REST APIs or CRUD operations of REST, like post and delete. So whatever we do in terms of the target system through API, so the complete protection is given by SAP with session-based authentication and client-side CRF handling. So these are all the measures which by default through API packages SAP is providing. So through which we can securely develop the cloud integration scenarios while calling APIs or while calling the REST APIs or OAuth APIs. So that's how security measures SAP strictly follows in terms of API communications, and also the tools what SAP is providing in terms of user interface security. So by default we don't know, but internally they always protect the CSRF and XSRF specific issues. So even if browser is not compatible, we generally face these the forgery issues. The SAP release note is there where the supported browsers which gives the cross-site request forgery and also the cross-site scripting support. So SAP supports Chrome and Edge at this point in time. Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Prasad. Thank you, Sridhar. So let's just quickly take the questions. I see there are 4 questions in the Q&A section. So what is the custom domain integration? This is the first question that we have.
Yeah, I mean, custom domain integration, as I said, yeah, so custom domain is a service actually within BTP through which you can bypass the original URL of your integration suite, and then custom domain will enable us to mask the actual URL of the integration suite, and so that you can use within the proxy so that it's highly secured your integration. Yeah.
Thank you for answering that. The next question is, what is the difference between SSO and OAuth?
Okay, so yeah, I mean, SSO is a single sign-on, right? So OAuth is a authorization protocol. Okay, so SSO is actually is described as a single sign-on, which also, I mean, user uses the same credentials to access multiple domains. But in case of OAuth, it's not like that. So OAuth, in a simple way, OAuth is an authorization protocol, and SSO is a single sign-on, which uses the same credentials to access multiple domains. Yeah.
Understood. Thank you, Prasad. The next question is PKCS7 a private key?
Yeah, I mean, PKCS7 actually it's a single binary certificate, so it doesn't contain any private keys. Okay, so it doesn't contain any private keys. Yeah.
Okay. The next question is, what trust model does pretty good privacy, PGP?
Okay, so the open, we call it as open PGP. So open pretty good privacy. It uses network trust model actually. It uses a web of network trust model.
Thank you, Prasad, for answering that. With that, we come to the end of the Q&A section. I'm sure the audience would have more questions. We would ask them to directly connect with us. I'll provide you with the email address at the end. Before that, so don't forget to log in on 22nd of Feb, which is going to be our final episode for this BTP webinar series, where our expert will be covering an interesting topic, which is related to clean core, how, why, tools, and platform. And lastly, I want to express my gratitude to our expert for their presence and contribution to make this webinar a great success. We're definitely fascinated by what we have learned today. Feel free to reach us at info@yash.com. That is info@yash.com. Thank you for joining. See you folks next time.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Prasad.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Sridhar. Thank you, Prasad.
Thank you.